Well, obviously, we have to keep your mouth close to the microphone. So, well, first of all, on behalf of the Danube Institute, may I welcome you to this evening's meeting. I have to say we're branching out, the Danube Institute, that is branching out in a new field, and I don't think I know we have had members of royal families and distinguished imperial families at our conferences in the past. Generally, people connected with this part of the world, the Habsburg family and others. But this is the first time in my recollection that we have had an event that is devoted solely to a royal topic. I have to say we're leaving my comfort zone here, and I'm delighted to see it's the comfort zone of so many people, particularly new members who are here for the first time. But it's very much in the comfort zone, I think, of our speaker, Elisabeth Moutet. Well, you can see Elisabeth's record of success in journalism. To me, she's known particularly as the Paris correspondent of the Sunday Telegraph in London, having worked previously at the Sunday Times and the Daily Telegraph. She's also a fixture on American and British television when they want to have someone to explain the mysteries of French politics to them in a lively and informative, but always very well informed way. So we're very fortunate to have her today. I'm just going to say that the topic, namely the new situation of Prince Harry and the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, as they will be in April, as a result of the changes in their relationship with the rest of the royal family, becoming, in a sense, not ceasing to be royals, but ceasing to be, so to speak, active senior royals and playing a somewhat distant part from the rest of the royal family and creating all kinds of interesting constitutional questions. So since, as I say, this is not my comfort zone, I think it's sensible of me to simply hand over to Elisabeth and welcome her and say how much we're looking forward to what she has to say.
Thank you very much, John. And first of all, it's not so much of a comfort zone, but John has only touched on one half of my work, and that's my work in English. And my work in French is explaining the mysterious Anglo-Saxons to the French. So it can be Boris Johnson, and it can be Donald Trump, and it also is the British royal family, on the point of view that you speak English, tell us about the royals. So after several years, you begin knowing a few things. Not as many as others, but anyway. One of the reasons why I thought this was an interesting topic, apart from the fact that it is topical and it happened last week, and how often do you have a conference on something that happened last week? To a journalist, it's almost irresistible. But it's that it's not just gossip and it's not just royal reporting, it's also political. First of all, because the English royal family is still a reigning family with a constitutional part that's very clear, and therefore it's not decorative, it's not former royals, and and the Queen is much more than a figurehead. The Queen opens Parliament, the Queen has a brief to advise her government in case she feels that they make mistakes. It will tell you that, a great deal about the principle of neutrality of the Crown, that they have not, the Queen has not felt necessary in the past 3.5 years to give any kind of advice, even covert, on Brexit. But still, it's an important part to play, and especially it's going to be interesting to in the future. There's after a reign that is now 68 years, has lasted 68 years. The Queen is today 93. Her mother lived until 101. So long may she reign, but one day she'll be succeeded by her son Charles. Her son Charles is less of a consensual person than she is, and she is therefore extremely alert to the fact that nothing must come to mar the image of the royal family and the legitimacy of the British royal family, especially in today's divisive politics. So we were actually touching on something that has a bit of a political aspect. If you think back again, the real big news from Britain in the past 3.5 years is Brexit. And Brexit has changed the British, and as a French woman, brought up in England, I can say that I've got the inside and outside look on this. And the British themselves and the nations surrounding them or watching them have been surprised by the level of acrimony, of bitterness, of rancor that has appeared in the political discourse. This was new. This was relatively new. It tallies, unfortunately, with politics in the rest of the world, but it was still a great shock. And so anything that will divide further the nation is something that would be less important politically, as it was, for instance, at the time of the death of Princess Diana 23 years ago. But certainly today it is something that also has to be watched with some amount of concern. So I don't know how much you've been following this. I think it was probably difficult to miss it on the front pages, but possibly you did not go and read the pieces avidly, as some of us have. But essentially, 18 months ago, Prince Harry, the younger son of Prince Charles and of the late Princess Diana, married a woman he'd met a year before on a blind date in Canada, an American actress called Meghan Markle, who starred in a long-running series on network television in America called Suits. It's a series which I haven't seen, but it's about lawyers. And in America, when they have lawyers on television as opposed to in real life, they look like Meghan Markle. They met. Prince Harry, who found it very difficult to live through the divorce of his parents and then the death of his mother when he was age 13, dated a number of young women from the upper classes in Britain, and that was fine, and he apparently it was not catching on, and he met somebody who was incredibly different. She's an American. She is 3 years older than he is. He's today 35. She's 38. She has a career. She is somebody who's a strong-minded, strong-willed. We found out, I think half the viewers, or most of the viewers of Suit, the series, didn't realize that she was mixed race, but we found that she looks like a sort of well-tanned, very elegant person of whose race you don't think about. But they also found out that, and in many ways, it was also for the nation, it was something that was, contrary to things that are being said nowadays, very welcome. I don't know how many of you have watched the wedding on television. Anybody here did? Aha. Irresistible. The wedding was watched by, you were not alone. There were almost 2 billion people watching with you, which, considering the time we're living in, and we're in 2020, it was 2018, I was commenting this on a French cable channel, and it was, it still had a magic, it still had an interest. There was something that was extremely cheering up for the nation and people worldwide, as this is the royal family of Britain, which has existed since the 11th century, and in the more or less current shape, and has existed even before, was very happy to welcome somebody who was the image of the new Britain, and there was old history and new history, the Commonwealth and the Americas, a former colony. There was, the young prince whom they had seen following the coffin of his mother across a part of London, seemingly extremely happy. And the whole thing was welcomed by the British, saying this is a good omen in the 21st century. The symbol, as the constitutional expert Megxit said in the 19th century, symbolism is very important in a monarchy. 18 months later, the Princess Meghan, who soon was named the Duchess of Sussex, with her husband having the title of Duke of Sussex, decided that this was not for her. And from what we know, last this winter, they left on holiday for 6 weeks, and during those 6 weeks which they spent in Canada, she told her husband, it has been reported, this is not working for me. I want out. The result was, upon their return, not having been active in anything royal for 6 weeks, they let the royal family know, and that means the Queen and her people and Prince Charles, that they had qualms and they wanted to devise something. And the advice they got from Buckingham Palace and from the Queen was, let's talk about this and then we'll devise something together. The lack of trust was such, especially from Meghan, that there was a press release let on the Sussex's own Instagram account, and Prince Charles and the Queen were told 10 minutes before. This is unprecedented in the use of royals. It's certainly something that spin doctors in Hollywood would teach you how to do to get the advantage, to get your story in first. It's well known in politics, but it certainly is new in royal affairs. And the question was, how would everyone react? And what the release was saying is, we want to remain active royals, but we want to step back. And we want to support the Queen, but we also want to have our own life and spend part of our life in Northern America, which right now means Canada, but may mean something else. Again, this was unprecedented for many reasons. There is such a thing as senior royals, which John just mentioned. Senior royals are fewer and fewer members of the royal family who actually have the role of representing the Queen. Prince Harry was especially expected from now on to be representing Prince Philip. Prince Philip is now 98. He is poorly in health. His mind is fine, but his health is not so good. And he's no longer undertaking royal duties. Royal duties are insignificant and hugely important at the same time. Again, we're talking symbols here. The royals, the members of the narrow working senior royal family, go and they open public centers, they open business centers, they christen ships, they take part in various ceremonies, public, military, religious, since the Queen is the head of the established Church of England. And all of this creates and renews a link that exists between the royal family as representing the British people and the well-being, so to speak, of the nation. And you might think that this is ridiculous, but there are moments in which this sentiment, which is made of certainly privilege and a life of certainly sort of grandeur, if not luxury. These are two different things. Is that there's the feeling that also they will travel to every part of the nation. They will spend time talking to the people who are receiving them. They will have learned about what is going on, and this is a kind of symbolic renewing of the link. If you take a very hard-working royal like Princess Anne, who makes little fuss and is incredibly active, she has had 155 different days of work last year, and that meant about 450 various openings and ceremonies to attend. She is patron of regiments, she's patron of schools, she's patron of charitable institutions. She's very well known on the Save the Children charity. Prince Philip was very active in the World Wildlife Fund. And you count literally in the thousands the NGOs and charitable organizations that the royal family has been interested in. All of this is something that you cannot do if at the same time, as the press release of the Sussexes put it out, we want to be financially independent, and therefore we want to have our own careers in the new world. The idea that you can use a royal title and the aura of the royal family to make money is unfortunately something that was not acceptable. There followed about a week, 10 days of psychodrama, which everybody was reporting. A great deal of the news in every paper, including mine, got it wrong. But if you consider that royal reporting is something that goes along the well-known sort of artificial intelligence law of fuzzy logic, eventually, by fuzzy logic, by trial and error, you get to the truth. And the truth was proclaimed by the Queen at the end of that fairly short period. And that was, no, you cannot be semi-detached. You cannot be semi-royal in and semi-royal out. And therefore, you're not Royal Highnesses anymore. The Royal Highness title is now reserved to senior royals. In history, the HRH title has been taken away from very symbolic, divisive characters in the royal family. I will not even quote Mrs. Simpson, who became the Duchess of Windsor, because there was no way that were going to be two actual courts with a former king and a reigning king at the same time. But this also happened when Princess Diana decided to get a divorce. It was also the case to Sarah, Duchess of York. And again, the idea was you can lead a gossip life, or you can stay inside the royal family, but increasingly because this is not acceptable to the people, because this is going to harm the image of the monarchy, it is not going to happen. And it's a combination probably which works more easily with the British than any other nation, because they pride themselves on having a well understood but unwritten constitution. It all belongs to that. What has happened that is new about this is, just as people kept on saying, and I really am the opinion that this is true, that Brexit, which was a bad experience, would have been an even worse experience without the presence of the Queen, even though, and especially possibly before, because the Queen was not expressing herself. There was one stable person who'd been there for most Britain's living lives and memory. And she was the same, she was immutable, and there was the idea that she stayed, and the figurehead of the nation did not change. Now that Brexit has been acted and Boris Johnson has enough of a parliamentary majority that the decision is not going to be reversed, the divisions in the country that were created by Brexit, and which are divisions which are sociologically very emblematic of divisions that we see in other countries. The elites against the people, if you want to make this crudely. The anywheres versus the somewheres, if you take David Goodhart's division of people who feel that they belong to one place and people who feel that they belong to a strata of society, to a type of education, that they can work anywhere as well, in any capital and not their own, etc. And all those divisions which covered the Brexit divisions, the people who wanted to quote unquote take back control, to the people who said, how can we not be part of a bigger supranational entity and not stay in our provincial little land. This is exactly, this covers exactly in every poll that has been taken since, the divisions of the people who support Harry and Meghan with the idea that they want to be modern, detached royals, and the people who believe that it's not a good trick to play on the royal family, it's not a good trick to play on England, and who oppose the attitude of what they see as self-indulgence from the youngest son of the Prince of Wales and his wife. And we are there. What's interesting is how fast the Queen came to her conclusion, how fast the use of a house, not a terribly big house, but you and I would find it a nice house to live in, but a small house that the Sussexes were given by the Queen in Windsor Great Park was taken away from them, or at least not without a rent to pay. They had to say that they would pay back the refurbishing work that had been done in it. I mean, essentially, they had to give up on things that made it very, very clear that they were not. They had no constitutional part ever to play in the history and the politics of England. And when I say ever, should there be a divorce one day, Prince Harry will come back, and nobody knows what will then happen. But that's a change, and it certainly is the first time that a member of the family leaves. You had people who'd been married to members of the family. Sarah Ferguson and Princess Diana are good examples, but this is the first time that an actual member of the royal family says, I'm not taking this and I'm going away. We are there. It may be that the thing will quiet down. Certainly lots of people joked in England that if the Queen had negotiated Brexit, it would not have been 3.5 terrible years. It would have been done in 10 days. But all the same, it's a bit of a shock. One of the worst accusations that was levied by Prince Harry, who'd been told this several times by his wife, that the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle, the former Meghan Markle, was rejected by England because England was ultimately a racist country. It's difficult to judge this. Certainly there have been, in every country there are instances of racism. There certainly is no institutional racism in England. The Mayor of London is a Muslim Briton of Pakistani origin, and only have to think of those 2 billion people watching this wedding with a smile on their face to see that the racism at that time was not prevalent. It is entirely possible that there's discrimination against American divorcees in the royal family, but that is something that was born out of history. Let's put it this way. What is not good is that you now have people bitterly writing editorials in newspapers, arguing on Twitter, arguing in various social media, and amplifying the idea that no, we're not racist. Yes, you're racist. No, you're not racist. This is not, anybody who's lived in England knows what a pantomime is. And this is, no, he's not. Yes, he is. But it's also bad. It's also divisive for a country that has shown to itself an unpleasant image, which is already used by the proponents of Remain to taint people who wanted Brexit as being, bad people, stupid people, racist people, and it's a continuation of the same thing. I don't think Prince Harry intended it. I don't think Meghan cared or really paid attention to it. The one thing that we can say is that if she hadn't realized that she was not supposed to, she complained bitterly to a journalist of my own paper, Bryony Gordon, who's a friend of them both, that her voice was being muted. If she hadn't she hadn't really studied the job description of the British royal family is that they say nothing, and they say it with smiles and a few jokes. And obviously, she hadn't got the memo. But that's the situation we're at. It has interested lots of people. It's by no means finished, as when you move to America, you discover that the rules that govern paparazzi in Britain are much nicer than the ones that obtain in America, where, in a sense, anything goes. And that's where we're at.
And Elisabeth, thank you very much indeed. Now I'm going to ask a few questions, and then I detect certain interest in the audience that's going to provoke questions from all of you. So my first question is this. There's an incident back in the Windsor Palace in the late 19th century. The then Prince of Wales, later Edward VII, was giving a dinner party at a weekend for a number of guests, including an African king and the Crown Prince of Germany, later the Kaiser. The Kaiser greatly objected when the precedence list of who goes into dinner had him following the African king, and complained and said he ought to be present higher up the list. And the reply he received from Edward was, "Look, Willie, it's very simple. Either this fellow is a common or garden black, in which case, what's he doing here at Windsor? Or he's a king in Africa, in which case, Willie, he goes into dinner ahead of you." Now that's a very significant moment in a way, because it suggests that from the royal family's standpoint, the conventional European rules have to be subject to imperial interests. And one of those imperial interests, more now than then, though still, as the story illustrates, even then, the royal family had to think that all of its subjects would have to be accommodated, praised, their elites elevated, if the empire was going to work. And by and large, until the First World War, the empire did work reasonably well. Now, the question is, and this relates to your last point, does Meghan Markle, I mean, the royal family today, the Queen, is the head of the Commonwealth. And that's a very important part of her role. I mean, we perhaps don't think of it here, but she has played a very important role in Commonwealth occasions, including on Rhodesia, for example, on a number of occasions. So obviously that's something which Prince Charles, as well as the Queen, has very much in his mind when he's trying to decide these questions. And I think the royal family has gone a considerable way to meet Meghan Markle's objections in order to accommodate her, though not everyone would agree with that. But they've done so in part because they see that having the royal family include someone of mixed race successfully would be a great addition to the way they are able to suggest that the royal family itself is representative of a multiracial Britain and of a Commonwealth, which again, of course, is obviously multiracial. So to what extent is she likely to damage that set of roles the royal family has, and to what extent is she likely to shore it up as they originally hoped?
Actually, I think you're making a good point, which I forgot to make, which is that Prince Harry, who has a great fondness for Africa and has created a charity with the Crown Prince of Lesotho, specifically for African children, was named as the youth ambassador to the Commonwealth, and the Duchess of Sussex, his wife, was co-ambassador with him, and that was part of a role that the Queen had in mind for both of them. Towards the Commonwealth. His interest in Africa predates his meeting Meghan Markle, but certainly it helped a great deal. And my feeling on this is that there's a feeling that African Americans and Africans have a lot in common. And my experience on both sides is that two Africans, members of African citizens of African countries, she is mainly an American, and to Americans that would be slightly different. But the only attempt there was to sort of relink Africa to the descendants of slaves in America is Liberia. And Liberia isn't seen by the rest of Africa as a huge success of resettlement, and possibly it was doomed from the start. But can what she's saying, and especially the accusations of racism, harm the Commonwealth and the relationship between Britain and the Commonwealth? It's analysis, and analysis is a combination of experience and gut feeling. It's not something that I got any kind of inkling on. I don't think it's so bad, because I think somebody in the royal family will take this up, and I do not think that it will be seen as a rejection of her that way. Will this impact British-American relations? I think much more, because America especially, our countries are seeing this, but America especially has been for the past 15, 20 years in the thrall of bitter identity politics, race politics. You have entire swathes of the liberal and left-wing opinion that believes that it is the America is a deeply unjust and racist country. This is going to reinforce that point of view, and it's right now you have people who play racial politics who are at the forefront of the opposition to President Trump. President Trump may be re-elected this time, but he will finally sort of leave power in 4.5 years, and therefore whoever follows will find themselves, unless the solution, this situation has become becalmed, which is very possible, will find themselves facing the same kind of problems. And I think it's a great headache for Boris Johnson, and I would say that it's less in terms of the Commonwealth, especially since the Queen is still alive, but it's a real problem in America. I don't think Trump cares, but in terms of having bipartisan sort of relations, because you never know who's going to renegotiate your trade deal at a post-Brexit time, it's very important not to give that impression.
Thank you. Now I want to ask a constitutional question in a way, but the most important role the Queen as head of state, or Prince Charles later, will ever have to play, and of course it's the role that they never want to have to play, is that of constitutional umpire, where there's a serious crisis grave enough to threaten the workings of government, and which has not been soluble within the House of Commons, and the House of Lords, and so on. Brexit came close to that, but it never became that. Now, previous crises, 1931, for example, 1911, I think, the monarch called in the leaders of the political parties and said, look, we can't have this going on in this way. We must find some kind of solution. And in 1931, it effectively meant partly the breakup of the Labour Party as its leadership joined with the Conservatives and the Liberals to form a national government. Whether you regard that as a success, I do, a lot of historians don't, but it certainly meant that the constitutional crisis was averted and normal politics resumed. And, more or less united Britain entered the Second World War. Now, the point is, all of this depends upon the monarch not expressing highly controversial political views. The Queen, as you pointed out, has always avoided doing this, and I can't think of an occasion when she's when she's actually by mistake or inadvertently broken that rule. I can't think of a single occasion. It's a remarkable record. The Duke of Edinburgh might once or twice have been said to have put his foot in it, but never, in my view, seriously. And he's played a terrific role in supporting his wife and in being a strong guardian of the constitutional order, which he apparently is in private, referring to it as the firm and so on. Now, Prince Charles, it seems to me, has to some degree challenged this political neutrality. I think on most things he's done so on issues in which I think most of us would agree is legitimate. His strong views in defense of traditional architecture against architectural modernism would be one. Maybe the architects are angry about that, I believe they are, but nonetheless you can't say that it threatens constitutional order. And now where he's come closest, it seems to me, to putting his foot in it, is on the environment, where even though what he says is supported by most of the organs of the establishment quite strongly, nonetheless there's a significant part of the British political spectrum which doesn't like it and thinks he shouldn't really get involved, and particularly since, unfortunately, all his predictions, they tend to be in 5 years, and 5 years later these things haven't happened. So there is that. There's the problem. But he hasn't challenged the Constitution in any serious way. Now, are we likely to see, in your view, in a serious way, Meghan Markle, who seems to have pronounced political views of what is called now in Britain a woke variety, is she likely to push Harry in the direction, and push herself in the direction of expressing views which run up against the grain of a lot of British public opinion and political opinion in ways that threaten the monarch's neutrality?
I think that is one of the reasons why the break was consummated so fast, because that's possible. She, for instance, refused and made her husband refuse to meet President Trump when President Trump came to for an official state visit to Britain, and they did not attend the dinner that was given at Windsor Castle. I should like to spare, I don't have that much genuine gossip, but I have genuine gossip on this one, which is that apparently Donald Trump is such a fan of the royal family that this is probably the only instance in which he was basically acting like an 18-year-old massively intimidated by the Queen, and that everybody who was waiting he brought all his children, including his daughter Tiffany with Marla Maples. They all were on their best behavior, and the Queen and Prince Charles were who braced themselves to be diplomatic no matter what he said, found out that he was an absolute pussycat, quote unquote. This is probably the only instance, but lots of people would cherish it, and certainly the people who worked on organizing the trip on both sides were certainly happy with that, if mildly surprised. In terms of Prince Charles, there's one instance in which I think, again, it's not a straight constitutional question, but there's really one instance in which he has intervened, written letters to ministers, which is something that he has been wanting to do for a long time and has stopped doing now because he realizes that he's getting closer to becoming king, and that was in supporting homeopathy. And the use of homeopathy by the National Health System. Homeopathy is something that people believe in, but it doesn't have a scientific basis. In fact, diverting resources from the NHS, the British National Health System, to homeopathy is not necessarily a good thing, and suggesting that a professor at the University, I think, of Exeter, who had led a series of studies into showing that homeopathy didn't work, did not really deserve to have his chair, and making him resign, Professor Edzard, is a real problem. And it was picked up, this is 6-7 years ago, it was picked up by the press at the time, and I think Prince Charles was made aware that he had bungled on this one. The royal family is well known to use homeopathy, but this is an instance in which your private choice is your private choice, but certainly they should not interfere in the scientific choices of the nation and the applied scientific cases. Now, about statements by Prince Harry or Meghan Markle. I think Prince Harry is in shock by how fast he lost everything that he thought he was losing. As we know, last Tuesday, it really went fast. not the day before yesterday, but the other Tuesday, was this meeting at Sandringham Palace with Prince Charles, the Queen, and Prince Harry. Meghan had chosen to go back to Canada, spending just 3 days in England, to be with her child who'd stayed there. And it was planned, or she and Harry planned, that she would take part in the conversation by link, telephone or video conference. Buckingham Palace aides said that they were seriously worried that the conversation would be hacked, and it was not a good thing. It's not an entirely sort of idle worry, because God knows Prince Charles and Princess Diana's conversations were hacked in their time, but it was also very convenient because most of Harry's firepower sort of disappears if Meghan is not with him. And he was on his own, and they had what was termed, not necessarily just in diplomatic terms. I mean, the Queen is very eager to keep him on side and to make him feel that he's still part of the family. But essentially what they wanted, they didn't get. Meghan Markle was in Vancouver Island in Canada, presumably with her spin doctors and her lawyers next to her. 8 months ago, she'd always kept her agent in Hollywood. 8 months ago, she hired a firm of lawyers in Hollywood, and she also hired the crisis management, a public relations firm, which leads to think that this is something that she's had in mind for a bit. At that time, which is last June, about 100 patents and brands were chosen for ranges of objects that would be branded Sussex Royal in order to defend the brand. You can say that in terms of intellectual property, you do this as a defensive measure, because once you own the copyright, nobody can sort of sell those instead of you and quote unquote dilute your brand if you're talking in commercial terms. But there's also the possibility that part of this financial independence will have to do with using that brand. Now, what comes out of the agreement that they came out, and that was given out by Buckingham Palace last week, is that any use of something that implies the royal family and the brand, the name of the Instagram account, Sussex Royal, it's a royal title given by the Queen, and royal is self-explanatory. So there ought to be an approval from Buckingham Palace of all those objects, which is sort of clipping the wings of any sort of happy American business lawyer who'd like to expand in many different ancillary rights. I mean, they can make mugs, they can do T-shirts, they can do self-improvement courses. There's a large number of things that have been that now have registered trademarks. But so, having all this hampering them, I don't think there's a possibility that there would be a constitutional disaster on this, because it will be done from the outside. I also, frankly, having obtained all this, I think Prince Harry's in shock, because he felt that he had lived within. He's not known anything else in the royal family. He was an extremely good officer in the army. He served 2 tours of duty in Afghanistan. One of those was 20 weeks in which he was under fire most of the time. But he's never been outside. He now finds himself outside. Whether he's going to express himself in a kind of provocative way, being outside, I don't think it's his style. And I think in terms of Meghan Markle, when she's somebody who in her life has had various periods in her life, and when she drops that time, it's behind, it's behind, she doesn't look back. She usually even drops the friends that she made in that period of her life. And I suspect that in her case, when she said, this is not working for me, it meant I'm going to live back in America and I'm on to the next step. This is going to be pretty visible. And so because they are officially as non-working royals, I don't think constitutionally it can be harmful. But what do I know? There might be anything that suddenly makes it happen, and certainly anybody watching, including us, the hacks, picking up details might suddenly. They're both very thin-skinned. They both do not like criticism. She comes from Hollywood. If you're an actor in Hollywood, nobody ever says no to the talent, as they say in Hollywood. So she was shocked by the way the press criticized her. And any member of the royal family has been, and Britons in general are used to people joking about themselves and making irreverential comments, and she was not used to that. And Harry himself hates the press because he thinks they killed her mother. So they might very well say something unadvisable.
Well, yes. Let me now turn to the situation of you made a reference in your opening remarks about a slight prejudice in Britain, perhaps, against the royals marrying American divorcees. And of course, the famous case of that was Mrs. Simpson marrying Edward VIII. Now, that was briefly embarrassing, very embarrassing, because of course, in the run-up to the Second World War and in the early part of the war, both the Duchess of Windsor and the Duke of Windsor seemed to be flirting in some way with Hitler and with the Nazis, and then subsequently he had to be, in a sense, hustled off to Bermuda, where he became governor. This meant that they were never likely to enjoy in America any kind of political approval. They were tarnished by that. But they could enjoy, and to some extent could dispense, social approval. It was limited, but it was there. What kind of social power in the United States, if any, will Harry and Meghan Markle have?
That's a really good question, because the Windsors lived in exile. They lived in exile because, again, there was no way that there would be a rival court on British soil. Technically, I think Bermuda at the time was British soil, but still. Yes. And they were tainted by this famous and well-publicized trip to Germany, where there's a picture that was reproduced everywhere, where Hitler is practically kissing the hand of the Duchess of Windsor, and the Duke looks benignly on, and they all have wreathed in smiles. And like many Germans of a certain, and Austrians of a certain class, the British royal family was very important to them. But it's well worth mentioning that after the war, the Windsor were given a grace and favour house in the Bois de Boulogne by the French government, who felt, exiled king, they should have a place to live, and the embassy diplomats in London British embassy were told never to go and see them. And their friends were a number of Café Society people, plus another exiled couple, Lady Diana and Sir Oswald Mosley, who he, of course, was the founder of the British Fascists. They had been imprisoned at the beginning of the war on order of Winston Churchill, and they never renounced their opinions of pro-Nazism. I can't think that the Windsors were very ideological, but certainly the Mosleys were. So they were officially non-persons after the war, during the war and after the war. This is entirely different for Meghan Markle. She has cultivated of late a friendship with the Obamas. She has said that she's modeling herself on the Obamas, both in their incredible success in business, because they each had multi-million deals for books, and they were invited to speak at various conferences, and they are patrons in lots of charities. And she has, even before her marriage, and certainly the minute she got married, she kept on cultivating friendships with people like Oprah Winfrey, who is an opinion maker in America. And all of this with a narrative of a kind of success, which was elegant enough, because the Obamas, it's the president of the United States is not just hustling for business, but it was more than Hollywood. But certainly it was part of that personality and of the idea that this is the continuation of we have a black president, and we have this. And it has been said that she, in some context, has been saying that it would be she would consider a presidential race. It sounds crazy, but America is not Europe, and America can change very fast. I've lived in America, I have an American family. If there's one thing that we can say in Europe and say, this is not going to happen, it's another thing in America where essentially the country can change in 2 weeks. So if she plays her cards well, a presidential run after a life of charitable works in America and siding more and more with the woke side, that is perfectly possible.
That seems a very dramatic prediction, actually. I hadn't expected. No. I hadn't expected such a bold response to my question, and no doubt others will want to pick it up. Now, this is my last question, really. I want to go back now to the question of how she's going to play in England. I mean, she's been very popular until the last couple of weeks. And the last couple of weeks, she's become decidedly unpopular with some people, and even more popular with the ones who've stuck with her. And then some observers have noted that if you look at opinion polls, the attitude to Meghan Markle seems to mimic the attitude to Brexit. And so I'd like you to comment on that, and particularly then to suggest what kind of role will she play, and what kind of role can she play if in the circumstances that now exist in Britain and towards British opinion.
What's interesting here is the inconsistency of somebody who's married to a royal prince and who would become a heroine of the left, and because they are Republicans by and large. But having said that, yeah, I mean, absolutely, the divisions over Brexit are the same ones that they are over Meghan. That fount of information that you didn't want to know, Facebook, I can see the divisions among my friends who are sort of slugging it out on both sides, and it's entirely predictable, and it's really what it is. Having said that, she started being unpopular. She and Harry started being unpopular before this idea of departure, when they made what they thought were uncontroversial statements about the environment, about sort of, consuming less, having a lesser carbon footprint, and then they went to various conferences on the environment in private jets, having the footprint of a very large elephant. This was immediately picked up by the press, which, the British press is very irreverent, and they're enjoying doing this. And there's an element of hypocrisy in this that sort of came along. And then Elton John loaned them planes and said, I'm compensating, I'm buying trees, I'm having trees planted, so they can travel because I'm planting trees, and so it's a neutral carbon footprint. And the idea is, yes, well, when you're that rich, you can do what you want, and you just buy trees, and it's very much like buying indulgences in the Catholic Church. And we know that that led to Martin Luther. So again, there are lots of possibilities in there. It depends entirely whether people, whether Meghan wants to make a point to the Brits or whether she wants to go forward with a career and with making money. It has been argued, you have to fill column inches. It's been argued that they could make a fortune. They could make $200 million, $400 million, appearing in films. There's an amusing bit of video which was shown on various social media before they announced that they wanted to leave, where they both went to the premiere of The Lion King last autumn, and somebody caught with a telephone Harry saying to the chairman of Disney, my wife does voiceover, she's really interested. And there was this sort of pitching for his wife, which was endearing and totally inappropriate for the royal prince. And you could see on the face of the wife of the Disney chairman that, they are being ambushed in various places and cocktail parties, but in the royal receiving line was a new experience for them. And there was an element of surprise in that. That looked very tacky to the British, so we don't know how much the element of, she sees herself, and she is a celebrity. She never saw herself quite as a royal, but she understands very much celebrity. I suspect that in the British mind, which is again inclined to be irreverent, the whole notion of celebrity is slightly naff, to use an English word, and so that would mitigate the damage she can do.
Yeah. Well, actually, this is one final question. She's going to play some important role in one way or another. But can you recall anything interesting she has ever said?
Yes, but her voice was muted. She's complained bitterly about this. I mean, if you go to the Wayback Machine, you can see her former lifestyle blog and her former Instagram, and she killed all that off when she got married to Harry. And it's incredibly sort of what people like to hear. I mean, if you look at the second section of The Guardian, that's about what she says, and it's some of it is mildly, it's the environment, empowering women, nice things and the catchphrases for the left, but not bad things. So no, she hasn't said anything that was remotely sort of original. Let's put it this way. It's not been original. I know many, many people who believe this and say it all the time.
It sets my teeth on edge. Let me now throw the discussion open to the floor. The gentleman there.
Hello, I just wanted to ask if you think that Harry has married his mother in any sense, because I saw a remarkable photo a couple of days ago, where I don't like this man filming me, but I saw a remarkable photo where she was sitting alongside Harry and they were answering questions from a journalist. And she had an extraordinary head tilt where her head was down a little bit. She was smiling. She was looking up in a sort of contrived, charming pose. And I suddenly thought, my God, her mother did that all the time.
His mother.
Yes, his mother, quite, yes. Diana did that all the time. And it looked very, very manipulative and very practiced and very odd. And I wondered if you think he's married his mother.
Let me, the British press is still one of the press where they still hire people, and you definitely have a job there, because that's a good, there's a whole 800 words to be written about this, easily captioning that picture, and you've just done it. It's very impressive. Rumbled. Yes, we all have this weird, this is why the royal family calls us journalists reptiles. They don't like us, and sometimes I can see their point. But having said all that, she is a strong woman. She is a woman who believes in causes. She is unlike, the English roses, including the Duchess of Cambridge, William's wife. And yes, there is an element of that, but now, was she doing this consciously? And if I wanted to be really catty, I'm not entirely sure she's that good an actress. But
do you think he sees her as someone outside, a little bit outside the family, a little bit like his mother, rejected by the family?
Yeah, and he has said it. He has said it in interviews. My wife is being persecuted by the press, and she's persecuted like my mother, and I do not want to see history repeat itself. And it's one of those things in which you think, oh, cringe, and at the same time you think, I can see why he's saying that. So it was overblown. Has she fanned this feeling that he has? Has she said, they're doing me what they did to your mother? I wasn't there between them. Is it possible, again, we're going into the realm of making up things. There must be an element. That must be, but you never do these things solo, and it's entirely possible that she felt a need, and when you like someone, you love someone, you instinctively fulfill the need. I think it's codependency in some ways. It's all I can say about this. The answer is, I do not know.
Okay. Next question.
I know which head posture you use.
Yes. Next question. It's the lady there.
Just a moment, please.
Thank you. I'm Zsuzsa Pataki, a Hungarian with a Canadian husband, and I am a little bit concerned about who will pick up the tab of their security, considerable great security expenses.
This is being discussed still, you're quite right. I know that the National Post had a leading article, it's a large and respected newspaper in Canada, saying we don't want to pay for their security. Private persons, yes. Governor of Canada, as some people airily said, no, the Governor of Canada actually has a job. And certainly we do not want to pay to pick up the pieces. And I suspect that this will be very soon a political football, and that Justin Trudeau will not want this to make his life more miserable. The British state, meanwhile, has said, obviously you need to pick up the tab for any kind of official function in which a royal is in a representative sort of role. My strong suspicion is that they will end up having private security with the occasional police security if there's anything that's remotely public. You have lots of grey areas. For instance, Meghan decided when she was in Vancouver that she would visit 2 women's shelters to show that she was a good person doing good things. It turns out that she didn't speak to the women in those shelters. She's been carefully photographed with the women's teams, with the staff, and those shelters were shelters run by a charity of a friend of hers. So this is somebody who very obviously is conscious of the optics. If, for instance, they say, well, she's going to visit the shelter and therefore she has to have public security, if there's a feeling, it will not be said, it's the press will say, well, she did this because she wanted good pictures to show what a nice person she is. It's public relations. And then if any public money is expended on this, I can see the press turning against them. Any good public relations agency, any good spin doctor will say, look, be careful, this will happen to you. Do they have good spin doctors? I have no idea. I remember as a child seeing the Duchess of Windsor going to the same hairdresser as my mother. She had no security.
Yes, thank you. Next question. Yes, gentleman here.
Thank you. I have a question which has nothing to do with the topic. What's the more difficult, explaining the British to the French or the French to the British?
That is such a good question. I would say to some extent that, whenever you try to explain something, that if you're talking about somebody popular, it's not very difficult to explain it. If you're trying to explain Boris Johnson to the French, that is immensely difficult because he is so alien to the French perception of things. And so they look at the hair and they say, he's Boris Johnson. He's Donald Trump. And he really is a very different type of character as Donald Trump. And so trying to sort of turn the tide and say, well, you may think that he is somebody who won elections with the sophisticated classes against him, but that's what they have in common. But seriously, different system, different person, that's very difficult to explain. And explaining what drives Emmanuel Macron in something that's less than caricature to British readers, that's very difficult too.
But in fact, according to the latest news, Emmanuel Macron has now switched to rather liking Boris Johnson. And okay.
I know. Instead of being here, I was supposed to do a podcast at The Spectator about that cover story. Macron has only one friend in Europe, and that's Boris Johnson. Well, we all are journalists, even in sophisticated magazines, and Jonathan Miller, who's a friend who wrote this piece, is making that case. But I've now seen Macron operate for some time. Macron, first of all, has managed to make enemies in Europe. He still wants to take the leadership of Europe. If he is seen by the rest of the European Union leaders, who are not so crazy about him, as the Boris whisperer, the man who can explain Boris to the rest, it might give him an edge. And he's somebody who does tri-dimensional chess, and therefore that's him. But the other thing is that Macron has a very special MO, and that's try to charm people he doesn't like. And you've seen him with Donald Trump. Immediately after the election, Donald Trump was invited to France. There was a power at the Élysée Palace, and the first thing that came after the election was, when he comes next year, do we invite him to what would be natural, the D-Day celebrations in Normandy? And Macron said, absolutely not. What I'll do is spend my time saying thank you to the Americans. This is not what I want to do. We'll invite him to Bastille Day, and he will be shown the French army from the Arc de Triomphe to the Place de la Concorde, and he will like it or lump it. I'm joking here, but basically, the idea was we're not a nation saying thank you, we're a nation with a modern army. So impressed by the parade on Bastille Day was Trump that he wanted to have one in Washington, and many people had to explain to him that it is not the same culture and they don't want one. But that took up a great deal of goodwill in America. But Macron has made he made a specialty of staying on the phone to Trump, talking to him every week, talking to him directly in English, no matter that there might be misunderstandings. He thought that the element of contact, direct contact, was more important. And there was a long time in which this lasted, even though their opinions are so different. There was a moment when Trump, who still read newspapers, and in that respect, I like him because not many of those left, and he would highlight stuff or write arguments in the margins of actual newspaper clippings, and then they would be sent to Paris by diplomatic bags, and those would include good guy, and yes, I meet my compliments, which, Macron was saying, well, we can talk to the Americans, or at least they're not ill-disposed toward us, and that was a form of diplomacy. I suspect Boris Johnson is a slightly different person, and charming Boris Johnson, who's the same generation as Macron, given 10 years, is a different thing, but that's the way Macron operates. In the end, Macron's aims are not the aims of Britain. If he can go some way towards trying to soften the way the EU is approaching the negotiations with Britain in terms of the conditions of trade between Britain after Brexit and the European Union, anything is good for Boris Johnson, and he's an intelligent man, and he will get it. I mean, he's subtle. Does that mean that they are friends? The answer is no, they're not.
There are two people we've discussed tonight. We've discussed a lot of people, actually, and we've discussed where they're going, what their views are, and I wonder about two who, more than any other, that these two people are most opposed to each other, and I wonder what the relations between them are going to be like in the next few years. And those two people are Donald Trump and Meghan Markle, because it's obvious that she detests him. And it's obvious that she's now going to find herself, or at least she perhaps will believe she is in a position in which she can express her views without restraint. Do you think that's likely to happen, and what will be the result?
I think she's the best thing that can happen to Donald Trump from Donald Trump's point of view, because it's one thing to have a representative, no matter how left-wing, accuse you, this is within the political game, but have basically a Hollywood actress who's managed to make a failure of her marriage to a member of the royal family accuse him. It's going to say, look at the people they stand against me now who send themselves against me. I think it's a great gift and to some extent, if he says anything about her, it will be a gift to her too, because Hollywood leans left.
Do you think he's going to say, she can't say it, of course, but the Queen is on my side?
Not going to happen.
No.
From his point of view, I have no clue.
Yes, absolutely. Who is going to ask the last question? Oh, Mark.
Thank you very much indeed, Elisabeth. A terrific and entertaining presentation. And when in 2024 the Democrats are going through their process for who their candidate's going to be, we'll be thinking of you. I think as to whether that forecast was.
Not necessarily 24.
Oh, you think it might be a bit later than that?
No, I think she will run for Congress first.
Oh, for Congress first, right? Okay.
I mean,
Well, good, yeah.
she, you can say many things about Meghan Markle, but she's not stupid.
Yeah.
And I have a friend who works for one of the members of the royal family who was in a meeting with several Buckingham Palace people and Meghan and Harry on non-controversial things. And what she said afterwards was, there were 8 of us in that room, and Meghan had more grey cells than all of us combined, all the rest of us combined. So there was admiration there.
In response, John, to your question about has she said anything memorable, the only thing I can remember is that she commented shortly before the big bust-up that no one had said to her, "Are you okay?" And I think this sort of underlines I'm afraid, the self-pity aspect of
and she did that in South Africa, where she just visited hostages and hospices for children who with AIDS and women who'd been beaten by their husbands. And the one, she was given a microphone by somebody, and she'd been sort of meeting people and sympathizing for a long time. But the idea that she could do that was, I think the Queen saw that, shuddered, and thought, we don't need this.
Yeah, but in terms of how you sort of summarize all this, I mean, it seems to me that despite embarrassment and messiness for the royal family, that this is a pretty good outcome, actually, in the same way that the disappearance of the Duke of Windsor back in the 30s was. Initially, she was seen as something really good for the royal family, an opportunity to modernise the institution, to attract a lot of people who otherwise weren't sort of traditionally supporters of the institution. That turned sour really quite quickly. I mean, everything you said about her and Trump, I mean, the extraordinary behaviour of not turning up, for a presidential visit and supporting the Queen, a lot of the racism charges, I think, have been, in fact, in response to accusations of hypocrisy on the ecological stuff. So, I would have thought, the monarchy has dodged a bullet in all of this. And do you essentially agree with that?
I would essentially agree with that. I think the accusation of racism are incredibly toxic, and I would agree, save the fact that this will fester for a bit. And it entirely depends whether the nation feels at peace with itself. And it hinges on, will Brexit be a success? Because right now, the people who didn't vote for Boris Johnson are in shock. The people who sort of saw the Tory party divide itself were sort of still in sort of happy relief, but nobody stays up in politics ever. And if this could be reactivated, but the fact that there's something so final so soon is a good thing. And as a solution, it's a very good one. I think one of the reasons is that they wanted to do this so fast was also because of that. But the Queen wants to keep the door open to Harry if anything happens.
Well, now, thank you very much. That's a very good summary of what's been an incredibly lively discussion, which is due, Elisabeth, to you. You gave a terrific opening talk, and you've stimulated a lot of argument and debate and discussion. Now, I think I want to thank you on behalf of everybody here, and then we're going to have about 3/4 of an hour in which they can get at you directly. Thank you very much indeed.